All right, I think we are live. Let me just make sure everything's okay. All right, I think we're live. Yes. Hi, everyone. Happy Sunday. Thank you for coming in. I hope everyone is happy and safe and healthy today. The Facebook Live, let me see. Yeah, it should be up. It should be up. And I want to welcome you, and I just want to thank you for joining me in this session. As always, I'm honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things I want to do in our time together here today are, as usual, I will formally set sacred space in just a moment. And then we'll have our overall topic that we'll cover. And today the topic will be the experience of life as symbol versus allegory. And the way we'll do this is we'll have a story that Gowrie has selected and she'll tell, and then we'll kind of unpack it and kind of kick the ball back and forth a little bit like we did last week. I think people seem to like that. And that's a really fun format for us. So we figured we'd just do that for the next few sessions and see where it leads. We'll have a little bit of an exercise. And then there's a fun little, I guess, additional story I wanted to share with everyone from something that an advisee sent me a couple weeks ago. And then we will close sacred space, and that'll be it. That'll be the session for today. So now we'll go ahead and set sacred space. And to start, I want to say that what we would like to do here, all of us together, is to create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define higher guidance. It could be intuition, it could be the muse, it could be something from the religion we practice. And the idea here is to set a safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no fear of danger or threat, so that we can together partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together in a group. In an opening sacred space today, I am proposing that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, with the internet, everything being recorded and everything being open to the public, the dynamics are a little bit different. And the way we do confidentiality here is through anonymization. So if you want to ask a question or chat, and you wish to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous, but you wish to be anonymous, you would come into the Crowdcast stream, which will ask you to log in and register, and then you'd go into the edit profile function of Crowdcast, and then change your username to Mickey Mouse, Harry Potter, whatever you'd like, and then you can proceed to participate anonymously. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the principle of no threat, no controlling, no intervention, no fixing, no tough love, no curing or attempt at curing. The idea here is that we are holding space for each other in sacred space to be however we actually are, with no attempt to actually change the state of each other from A to B. So that however we find each other, however we find ourselves, we just allow ourselves to be as we are, to be afraid, to be anxious, to be a mess, right? Or to be happy, to be actually doing okay, right? To be relaxed and actually to be okay with that, or to be doing okay and to feel horribly about that, or to feel really guilty about that. However you happen to be, to feel that and hold space for that, right? To basically hold space for that. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with, fixing, tough love, all of those other things. But those, because they are of the realm of fear, threat, and control, they are of the precincts of the profane. Profane is just profane, it's not bad. But when we come into the sacred, since our time here is so limited, typically, we want to do things in the sacred, which are nourishing, which we hew to, which can only be done in the sacred, right? And this holding space is typically something that you only do when you're in a sacred mode, and we want to partake of that nourishment while we're here, right? Because the time is kind of cut off, limited, and precious in that way. The third principle is a corollary to the last principle: no commerce. So nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. So even if it's a book or something you should look into, that sort of falls into the realm of fear, threat, and control. So if I say, well, I went through the same thing and I did this and it worked great for me, there's an implied kind of threat there, a well-meaning threat, which is if you don't even try it, if you don't even look into it, then you're this sort of, dumb slob, dunderhead that is going to stay in your suffering. And it's that sort of threat. So because of that, we can't sell you anything. I certainly can't sell you anything. But even recommendations, kind of crosstalk in the group. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is of the sort of province of the profane, where regardless of our intention, there is control being wielded. And in sacred, it's just the realm of surrender, not control. All right. So another way of putting it is that we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And then the fourth principle is simply no expectation of participation. And this goes along the lines of a space devoid of fear, threat, and control, right? So there's no pressure to do anything. There's no pressure to chat or not chat, ask a question or not ask a question. You can come and go as you please. You can watch the replay, not watch the replay. You can invite friends, not invite friends. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And then all of us together will tend to amplify that. And so these four principles, confidentiality, no fear, no controlling, intervention, no tough love, no commerce or recommendations, and no expectation of participation. These are the four principles I propose for us in holding sacred space together. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to come and join the sacred space or stay in the sacred space. But if you are not okay with it, we are about to step into the sacred space together. So we just want to pause here and give you a moment to make your selection and withdraw from the group as you see best, feel best. And we'll catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still hang out, no worries at all. So we'll give you all a moment to dial that in. Okay. Okay, and now for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into sacred space. And as we enter into sacred space together, I welcome you. I thank you for joining me. I honor you. And I will just sort of declare that the principles we're all going to sort of follow here are the four of confidentiality, no fear, threat, control, no commerce, recommendations, no expectation of participation. Okay, so here we are. Welcome back to our weekly sacred space, one of the best parts of my week. And so the topic we want to cover today is the experience of life as symbol versus allegory. And basically the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a folk tale that Gary has selected. And then dive into it and read it a bit as an allegory, and then read it a bit as a symbol, just to see what the pros and cons are. And again, this idea of symbol versus allegory, just like sacred and profane, it's not saying one is better than the other. It's just saying that there are two different modes, and we can look at it from each. And to the extent that we look at it only from one, you kind of potentially lose something. And if you're okay with that, that's okay, right? But it's more just sort of, you have a choice for the lens you use. And often if you use, both lenses, then you get an even more complete picture. And the idea of symbol versus allegory is that allegory is the feeling when you read a story or you interpret a situation where the upshot, the headline is that, well, given that story you just told, it just goes to show that blah, 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 right? And this sort of wagging finger naturally comes out as part of that. Well, it just goes to show that the moral of the story is you should do this and not do that. You should be like this and not be like that. So allegory is this feeling of the profane, of fear, control, and threat, the finger wagging, the use of the word should, the use of story to control you. So given this example, you should be the good guy, not the bad guy, right? And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but the allegorical lens is the more profane lens, right? And that's okay. And then the lens of symbol, right, is typically more like, well, yeah, I mean, there's all these different actors in the story doing different things. And I can imagine myself as the good guy. I can imagine myself as the villain. But when we read something at the level of symbol, we tend to zoom out to like the 10,000 foot level or the 30,000 foot level to say, what is the larger pattern going on here, right? Not even the larger pattern to say, okay, what should we be doing here? It's like, well, maybe something like that will still come out, but at a zoomed out level, what is the matter here, right? What's going on here? What's the situation overall? And we put the wagging finger away and we kind of sit back. And instead of this asking and interrogating, what's the rule? What should I do then, right? What should I enforce in the world and in myself? We put all that away and we move from a mode of asking and interrogation into a mode of wonder and curiosity, right? Where the signal kind of characteristic of allegory is should, it just goes to show the moral of the story, control. And the signal sort of gesture of symbol, of wonder, of curiosity is, right? It's like, interesting. And instead of doing this, I'm back and I'm just soaking it in. And I'm not even rushing to any conclusion or upshot or whatever. I'm just soaking it all in, right? And in that mode, in the sacred, right? Like it feels like when you're in meditation, it feels like when you're in deep reflection. The different elements of the story, either a folktale, a myth, a movie, a novel you're reading, the thing that happened with your in-laws just last week, right? Whatever it is, it holds that sacred space to allow those connections to come together in potentially new and different ways, potentially deep insights and, sort of brilliant flashes of insight. But even there, the insight is also, in my opinion, not why you do that, right? You go into a state of wonder and curiosity because you go into a state of wonder and curiosity, right? That state of wonder is itself the nourishment, right? So we don't, for instance, go into sacred space saying, well, it's good for me and I've measured my blood pressure before and after and it helps. So my doctor says I should do more sacred space. And it's like, that's still nothing wrong with that, but that is the profane. And when we come into sacred space, we come into sacred space for no good reason. That's what makes it sacred space, all right? There's no good reason. You can do a sort of double-blind sort of gold standard study and say, well, the sacred space has proven to lower your blood pressure. But even if you prove that, that would not be a reason to come in and do this, right? It would be at the level of desire for no good reason. I just like it. It makes no sense. I could be making money. I could be doing all these things with this hour or two every Sunday. It makes no sense. I'm coming in for no good reason. And that is the quintessence to me of the glory, right, of sacred space. And so that's a bit on symbol versus allegory. And the way I want to explore this is to use a folktale that Gary, my editor in Bangalore, India, has found, this time from Japan. And Gary, are you there? Can you hear me? Do you want to come on screen? Where is Gary? There she is. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah.
And so that you heard my intro. Just let me know if you have any additional comments or thoughts, and then if you'd like, let's check out the story you selected.
Right. So like last session, we used a story which was very open-ended, right? And this time it's the exact opposite. It has a nice little, opening, closing, and everything tied up neatly, and it's a sweet little folk tale. So it'll be fun to kind of get into that. And so this is a story from folklore of Japan, and it's called "The Old Man Who Made Withered Trees Bloom." So it's like you can't talk about Japan without getting into trees, right? So I loved it right with that. So yeah, so it's about magic and all sorts of fairy tale frills. So that's the story, right? And yeah, so should I go ahead?
Let's hear it.
Right. So this story of the old man who made withered trees bloom, he always didn't have that magical ability. He was just a regular old farmer who lived with his wife, and he had no children. And he was not very poor, but he wasn't exactly well off either. And he, tended to his land, grew his food, and the couple lived together. And they had a dog. It was a little Japanese dog which looked very much like a wolf, and it stayed outside the house. And the old man in the evening would kind of bring food for it, and the dog would greet him very happily. And he would sit with the dog, feed the food to him. And, that was like the best part of his day. Once he worked in the field, come back home, had his dinner, then went out and fed the dog. This was the best time of his day, and he really enjoyed that. And the dog was very fond of him and would greet him happily. And one day, so kind of this dog called him out and, took him outside and all of that. But before we get into what happened there, the old man also had a neighbor who was kind of wicked and cruel and hated this old man and his wife, hated the dog even more. He and his wife were kind of equally wicked. And if the dog ever accidentally even looked into their kitchen, they would hurl things at it and try to wound it and shoo it away. So a complete contrast to this gentle old couple. And one day, so this happens, this dog starts barking loudly in the field behind the old man's house. And he was barking so loudly that the old man went to see what happened. Maybe it's the birds eating the corn. Maybe it's some kind of animals in the field. Let me go and find out. So when he goes there, he realizes that the dog's actually dragging him to a place, and he takes him to a very large yenoki tree. Yenoki is a Japanese hackberry tree. It takes him to that tree and starts digging under the tree. And for a while, the old man wonders what's going on, but then he realizes maybe the dog's trying to point something to the ground under the tree. He goes back, brings a spade, digs the ground under the tree. And as he starts digging, he realizes after a while, he starts finding gold coins. And he just keeps digging and digging, and the longer he digs, more and more gold coins come out. And finally, when he's done, he puts the heap on the ground and looks at it. It's a lot of money. And the dog looks so pleased with himself. It's like, look, for all the food that you've given me, I've done this for you. So he's really happy. He takes the gold back home, and he's so pleased with the dog, and he loves him so much more if that was possible. And and the couple are very happy. But what they don't realize is that all through this barking, because the neighbor hated the dog barking so much, he came in to investigate, and through the bamboo bushes, he kind of saw what was going on. And he realized, so this old man got a treasure because of the dog. Now, I'd like to see if I have treasure in my backyard too. And what I'm going to do is use the dog to find my own treasure. So he goes to the old man, knocks on his door, and he says, if you don't mind, I'd like to borrow your dog for a few days. And this old man finds it very strange. He's like, I know this guy hates my dog, and what could he want with it? But, he's a really gentle old man. And he said, well, I'll lend my dog to you on the condition that you will take good care of him. And this man says, oh, yes. It's only for a few days. I'll get back to you. And he takes the dog, and he drags the dog by the scruff of his neck and takes him to the field and takes him to the enoki tree in his backyard, and kind of tells him, you must find the treasure. Now find the treasure for me. And his dog's kind of panicking and trying to escape from his clutch, and kicking the ground and then scratching the ground. And this man thinks that that's the spot where the dog has indicated. So he starts digging the ground there. And what he finds is that there's just a deep stench that comes up. And as he keeps digging, there's like a big refuse heap, which is giving out the stench, right? He gets really angry, gets so wild that he takes the spade, hits the dog, and the dog dies. And he throws the dog into the refuse heap that he had dug out. And he closes the heap and just buries the dog there, comes back home, doesn't even tell his wife what he's done. And that's it. That's the end of it. And this good old man has been waiting and waiting for his dog to return, and he doesn't hear anything. So he goes to the neighbor and asks for the dog. And this wicked man doesn't even bother to lie or, make up an excuse. He just tells him on his face, oh, your dog was wicked, so I just beat it and buried him. He's dead. And that makes this old man very sad. And he says, I'm so sorry, but, it's really heartbreaking for me to lose that dog. So if you don't mind, I have a favor to ask. Show me the spot where you buried my dog. And if you could give me that tree, I'd like to have something in memory of my dog. Now, this was a simple enough request. So the neighbor says, all right, you can take the tree. And the old man cut down the tree and took it back home. And he fashioned a mortar and pestle out of it, like the big ones where, you pound rice. So he made a mortar and pestle, and he, put it in the kitchen. And he thought, this is something that I would keep in memory of the dog. And then they were going to have a little ceremony to kind of honor the memory. So his wife started to pound rice to start to cook. And the amazing thing is, after a while, the pestle kind of started pounding itself. And instead of, ground rice, it started, pouring out rice cakes, like fully, properly made rice cakes. And there was just unlimited, as much as they wanted. So many rice cakes. And it was initially very surprised, but then they realized it was, the dead dog was still giving. And, they were very happy. So they kind of, had the ceremony. Now, again, the neighbor got to know of this. He'd been spying and sneaking around. So he got to know of this. And he thought, well, I'd like to have that too. So he came back again, asked the old man, can I borrow your mortar and pestle for a while? And, so this old man was like, do I really trust you? But then, he was too gentle to refuse. So he gave him the mortar and pestle anyway. And this neighbor took it to his house, took it to the kitchen, tried doing the same thing, thinking he would get rice cakes. Nothing happened. And he got angry again. So this time he threw the whole thing into the fireplace. And the whole mortar and pestle just burned down. And when the old man went back to ask back for his mortar and pestle, he said, well, I burnt it down because it did nothing for me. And this made the old man sad. He said, I'm so sorry to hear that. If you'd only asked me for rice cakes, I could have shared mine with you. There was just any amount of rice cakes that I needed. I could have got that and I would have given it to you. But anyway, if you don't mind, can I take the ash home with me? Because I'd like to keep those ashes in memory of my dog. And he says, all right, what good can the ash do? So you can take it. So he scraped away the ash and took it in a box. And one day, accidentally, he ended up throwing some of that ash in his garden. And this was late autumn. And he threw his ash and scattered on the trees in his garden. So there were cherry trees, plum trees, where all of them had kind of, the leaves had fallen at this time of the year. So when he scattered the ashes by mistake, suddenly, the garden all of those trees just bloomed into, flowers, and they just looked like it was spring. So it was really like it was spring all over again. It was beautiful. And, obviously this is so visible and in the outside. So the story spread. Everyone got to know about this old man who had a spring-like garden in autumn. And the story spread far and wide until one day there was a knight who showed up at his door. And he said, I represent the duke, the feudal lord. They call daimyo, I think. So the daimyo has sent me because he has a garden and there's a cherry tree that he loves dearly, and the cherry tree is dying. So he would like your help in reviving it. So the old man was happy to help. So he took a part of the ash, went to the daimyo's palace, and then the daimyo asked him, are you the old man who's supposed to bring back trees to life? And he said, yes. All right, then. I would like to watch you doing that, and I'd like you to revive the cherry tree in my garden. And then, they both go into the garden, and with the duke, the whole servants and his knights, everyone accompanies him to watch this whole miracle happen. His servants are carrying his sword for him, and, it's just a whole ceremony. And the old man does this. He scatters his ash, and just instantly the dying cherry tree comes back to life and starts to bloom. And the daimyo is really happy. And he says, this has been so great. I'm going to reward you with gold and silver and the best sake in town and everything. And also I'm going to bestow the title of Hanasaka Jiji. So Jiji is grandfather in Japanese. And it basically translates the old man who makes withered trees bloom, right? So he says, I'm going to bestow the title. That's how you're going to be known from now on. And the old man takes all the wealth and everything and goes back home. And of course, the neighbor hears the story. So he thinks, well, the ashes are from my fireplace, and I still have some of it left at the bottom. I could scrape that. And this must be like the easiest thing to do. I mean, of course, the mortar and pestle and getting the dog to obey you, all of that was tricky, but this is just ash. How hard can it be? So I'm going to try that too. So he takes all the ash that he can scrape from the fireplace. He goes into town around the daimyo's palace, and he starts proclaiming, I'm the Hanasaka Jiji who can make withered trees bloom. And the daimyo heard him, and he thought, oh, so, the old man must be back in town. Let me go meet him. And he orders the man to come to his palace. And when he sees him, he says, "Hang on a minute, you're not that old man. How can you make withered trees bloom?" And this neighbor said, "Well, the old man you met was my disciple. I'm the original Hanasaka Jiji, so I can make withered trees bloom too." So then, the Duke said, "All right, then, let me watch you do your miracle, and I want to see it." So this man goes into the garden and throws the ash that he has, and there's a dead tree in the garden, so he kind of throws it. Nothing happens. Forget coming back to life. It doesn't sprout even like the smallest bud on it. And the Duke is angry, and he says, "You're an imposter, and you lied to me." So he throws him in prison, and he keeps him in prison for the rest of his life. And, back in the village, the old man, the good old man, gets to be with the treasure that he got from under the tree, that the dog found him, and then all the wealth that the daimyo had sent him. So he and his wife lived, happily loved and respected by everyone the rest of his life. So that's the story.
Yay! Thank you.
So, it's a
great.
very pretty, be nice and gentle and kind and good kind of an allegory. But how do you read that?
Okay, should I start?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really liked the story when you told it to me last week.
Yeah.
And I remember during our conversation, this is another example of like you pick the story, you kind of don't really know why, like you're kind of you're following just what you like about it.
Yeah.
And then you read the story to me, and we're both like, huh? And then that's the point where the muse sort of like, that's the joint where the muse like comes in and starts like stirring the pot.
Yeah.
So I guess the way this came out was I was transfixed with the story because of the symbolism, right? The symbolism of the dog into the mortar, the sort of mochi rice cake pounding thing, and then into the ash. And the physics around this villain, because I'm kind of this fairy tale nerd, right? Where, I've done a lot of work on sort of fairy tale and myth that's led to, the work in dream reading. And the fairy tale stuff has been, we're in the middle of like trying to refashion it into a more kind of, into a not 19-month long program. Whatever that ends up looking like. But I was really struck by the parallelisms of some of the symbolism to some of the Grimm's fairy tales from Germany / Northern Europe that we've spent a lot more time on, right? Especially around the ash and the villain as like a false landlord. So anyway, let me dive into this a little bit. So the allegorical read of the story, obviously, is like, so be good like the good guy, be nice to dogs, right? Little sort of animal welfare sort of message mixed in there. Don't be an imposter. Don't lie to the Duke. And you'll get lots of gold and food and honor.
Yeah.
Right. So gold is, riches. Food is like physical pleasure, and honor is prestige.
Yeah.
And the first thing I want to say is that's okay, right?
Yeah.
That's a totally valid. We're not dismissing it. We're not, that's how you would read it. If if I were a little kid in Japan and somebody read this to me, that's probably how they would sort of wield it. But it does have this allegorical, like, so be more like the good guy, not like the bad guy, and you'll be all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Very simple, And all these symbols of like, but what about the mortar and pestle? What about the mochi cakes? What about the fact that it's a cherry blossom that blooms? And I can imagine the uncle or the parent who's reading it to the little kid going like, did you hear what I said? Be more like the good guy. Don't be like the bad guy. That's it. No conversation, right? Eat your dessert. It's bedtime, right? It's bedtime. It's like, oh, okay, all right, whatever. And you carry on.
Yeah.
So to read it with the lens of symbol then is more just to look at the physics and dynamics of the whole thing without looking for a lesson per se. I mean, lesson or sort of insights may come out of it, but you're just kind of almost like taking this crystal and turning it from different angles, purely, for no good reason, right? At the desire level, for no good reason, just because it's pretty, right?
Yeah.
And you have curiosity and wonder around it.
Yeah.
And so the question, the sort of attitude there is more like, what is the larger pattern here? What are the different connections going on here? And this is exactly how we tend to read dreams, right? When we do all of our healing work.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are not familiar, basically the sort of quick thumbnail of how to read a dream, how to read a myth. There are sessions way earlier in the Sacred Space session on dreams, on myth, and I refer you to those if you're interested. Is to regard every major actor or object in the dream as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner self.
Yeah.
Okay. So the old man is you. The dog is you, a different part of you. The Duke is you. The tree is you. The mortar, the ashes, the gold are different parts of you. And the villain is a part of you too. No less valid than the right hand versus the left hand versus the ear versus the foot. These are all different parts of you. And when you take a story like this and you hit the play button and the video of the story action rolls forward, what you're watching through the symbol is you regard it as a whole thing, as a single thing, single object or sort of multifaceted archetype.
Yeah.
And you're watching who's doing what to whom. And what is the upshot at the end?
Right.
Okay.
So it's the interaction.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, so it's the interaction between the actors that kind of gives clues.
Exactly. The interaction without being on the side of one or the other. It's like it's a tennis match, right? And the villain's on one side and the old guy's on the other. And you're not on either. I mean, you can be cheering for either side. That's sort of allegory. I want, the sort of the good side to win. But from this, like, it's like first bird, second bird. From the second bird perspective, you're more like the chair umpire. And you're watching, you're not uninvolved. You are involved. I mean, the chair umpire is part of a tennis match, right?
Yeah.
So you're not uninvolved, but you're not playing on either side. You're watching the overall thing quite attentively and actively.
Right.
Okay. Because it's not just about pounding and defeating the other guy. If one tennis player really wanted to do that, they would just pull a gun out and shoot the other guy and you'd be done, right? There's a reason we're doing it in the context of tennis, because we are honoring the game itself. We're in this sort of archetype of the two of us, seemingly rivals working together to create this more beautiful, larger thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, so the way I sort of read it, what I came to when, I was, we were sort of having our call and I was thinking about the story, is that, well, let me go through a couple of the symbols just for fun. So a dog is typically, when you see it in dreams, a symbol of the inner masculine, the inner masculine, at the body level, right?
Yeah.
And when I come up with these symbols of what they mean, the way I come up with them is it's a mix of, what they classically mean in sort of different cultural traditions around the world, and a kind of a rough average of that, right? With the biases. So I'm more biased toward, the Greek system, the Hindu system, right? And the Northern European sort of Grimm's fairy tale system. I'm not as versed in, say, the Mayan system or certain African traditions, certain, say, Southeast Asian sort of, Pali, Hinayana Buddhist traditions. So I have my own bias, and then also when I take that lens, part of my healing work is I help people read dreams. And over the past several years, I probably read, between 8,000 and 10,000 dreams for people, right, over the course of my work. And so it's also then informed by when these symbols have shown up in the dreams I've read, what they have tended to sort of symbolize and mean. And when I give this, so when I'm reading a dream for someone, I'm giving them the pattern and the tendency that I've observed, but it's up to the actual dreamer themselves to decide what it actually means, right? So I'm just the caddy, I'm not the golfer, right? You're the golfer, I'm just giving you advice. I'm not telling you this is how to do it, or this is not how to do it. It's sacred space when you're reading a dream like this. So a dog is typically masculine, and body masculine, because an animal is typically more representative of the body level, right? So neck down. So not intellect, spirit, but like body and soul. So
right.
Physicality, sexuality, sensuality, instinct, intuition on the masculine side.
Right.
And the two major functions of the masculine as we teach them here are boundary, setting and maintenance, so protection, and then basically manifestation, implementation, execution, right? So the feminine brings nurturing, nourishment, and higher vision, right? And then the masculine protects so that the feminine can do all these things, and then does the outward sort of the action of your will on the physical world around you, on the outside world around you, to change the world into what the vision is flowing through you from the feminine. That's the job of the master. And we all have inner masculine and inner feminine within us, regardless of our external self-identified gender, right? Yeah. And so, so this dog is also white, right? And it's not white by accident. The dog is white, and if I read this thing, the dog's name is Shiro, which actually also means white. So it's like pounding in it. It's like, no, we mean for the dog to be white.
Yeah.
And in many of these systems, I know in Japanese, white has certain connotations, but sort of across multiple traditions, there is this idea of the color white in the masculine realm being the representative of the height of masculine power, right? So there's like a triple color sequence of red, white, black.
Right.
And then black goes back to red again on the masculine side, where red is the red of anger and, angry young man, right? So the early phase of masculine energy and life cycle. Red is the red of blood spilled in battle, right? White is sort of midlife, is the sun at noon, right? Casting no shadows. It's a pure white light. It's not yellow. It's not red at sunset. It's like pure white. White is, the color of semen, right? It's like sort of associated with all these things. So the sort of power, sort of the zenith, the sort of peak of a man's power, they're prime. And then black is the black of the elder sage, Gandalf, Dumbledore, Yoda, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Yeah. And so here, and there's a similar cycle, but two of the colors are flipped for the feminine. It's white, red, black, and continues forward in that cycle. And so here, the dog is the height of this guy's power on the physical side. On the physical side, masculine, boundary control and manifestation.
Right.
And this is the dog he feeds, he nurtures, he nourishes. And then the dog leads him to treasure. Gold in a dream is more a symbol of insight, right? But it is coins and money, so it's sort of ego power / insight, so that's good. And then the dog gets transformed into a sort of rice pounder. So nourishment, and the rice obviously is white. The rice cakes are white, so it's more of the dog coming through in this form of nurturing.
Yeah.
And then the dog gets turned into ashes, right? And you can presume maybe they're like white ashes as well. These sort of funerary ceremonial ashes. It's not just black fireplace ash. It's like this white pure incense, right? Sort of style ash. So the power of the white is physical, leads to gold, leads to nourishment, and nourishment, not just food, but food in a dream is emotional nourishment, spiritual nourishment. It's like the nourishment we talk about when we talk about being in sacred space together. And then the ashes are more, ashes are a symbol in dreams of grief, of completed grief. Right? So we talk in Live Sacred Space about pressure and containment, right? And transformation. Pandemic is transformation, not just punishment. Right? So pandemic as symbol, not allegory. Where it's like Mother Nature's really pissed at you, you've done a horrible job, and now we're going to kick your butt, as opposed to transformation, where it's like, if it wasn't this way, it would be some other way that Mother Nature would put us through the initiation that we need to go through, right?
Right.
And it's not that one is right and the other is wrong. It's like both are valid, and are you looking through both lenses, right, or not? And so ash then is typically associated with so the cooking pot of pressure and containment. For those of you who have been following Life Sacred Space, the cooking pot of pressure and containment, which you are in, the heat of which and pressure of which transforms you. The fire underneath, when it has burned its full course and you have, by implication, completed your transformation, the wages of this grief and transformation are the leftover ashes.
Right.
And for those of you who have done like mythic healing stuff with me, the one I always lean on when I talk about grief is the devil's sooty brother. Grimm, I think it's Grimm's number 90, number 100. I don't remember, but it's the devil's sooty brother, or the dark man's sooty brother. And in that story, literally, he's like boiling cooking pots.
Yeah.
And then the wages he's given at the end of 7 years is this rucksack of ashes and wood shavings. He's like crushed. But of course, spoiler alert, when he goes back up into the upper world, all of that turns into gold, right?
Yeah.
Just like, so here you have the gold, you have the nourishment, and you have the ash.
Yeah.
So here we're looking at all the different rewards of the power of your inner masculine on the physical sort of body, soul side. Okay.
Right.
And all of these are accruing to the old man. So that's great. And in the end, he comes out great. He's like got this title, the villain, his like tormentor is like in jail. So everything's great. So the Allegorical says, so be like him and don't be like the villain, right? Don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
The symbol side pulls back and says, well, what is really the matter here? Right? So, and I always use that phrase, what is the matter here? And that comes specifically from another myth that I tell often in sort of mythic healing stuff, which is the Fisher King, right? The Arthurian cycle Fisher King. Whereas this concept of the healing question, right? The healing question, everyone's questing for the Holy Grail to like heal this like unhealable wound in this king that's in agonizing pain. Yeah. It's often a symbol of like midlife crisis, right? And the text, I think it's in the German version of the story, the Wolfgang von Eschenbach version of the story. These are all written around 1200, right? In Middle Ages Europe. The phrase he uses to describe the agony of the king with this unhealable wound of of castration, actually, right, where the generative function is just cut off, right, is that he is too ill to live and yet unable to die.
Yeah.
Right. Basically a zombie, what we would call a zombie. And the healing question, and the Grail is in his castle, but even the Grail can't heal him. Right. And the healing question of that story is, long story short, what ails the king?
Yeah.
In other words, what is the matter here? What is going on? Right? Instead of stuffing it down, don't talk about it, silence, silence. Just be the good guy, don't be the bad guy. The healing question at the 30,000 foot level is like, okay, without like jumping to conclusions or wagging my finger at you, I'm just going to pull back basically in sacred space and say, what is even the matter here? Is anything the matter? Right? What ails the king? And so when I pulled back here, I was like, it seems like everything turned out well. My eye and attention is drawn to the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
Which you mentioned at the beginning of the story, this old couple has no child.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's symbolic, right? There is no, it is like this Fisher King wound of castration. They are unable to procreate. A child in a dream is representative of like the next emerging part of you. So the 2.0 version of you, right? Yeah. Symbolically, it doesn't have to be a biological child. It could be your work. It could be your bliss. It could be people you mentor and care about, right? Organizations you nurture and raise, causes you defend. And you mentioned that they are no child, but when I look at the text that you shared with me, I'll just read this line specifically. Their life had been a very happy and peaceful one, even before the gold, even before the honor.
Yeah. Yeah.
It says their life had already been a very happy and peaceful one, save for one great sorrow. Yeah. And this was that they had no child. I'm just reading this.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not, oh, by the way, they had no child. They're an elderly couple. They're Japanese. It's like, no. Their one great sorrow is that they had no child. Right. And you can take that symbolically. And when I did my pullout to the symbol level, and I tracked all the way through the story, at the end of the story, he has prestige, he has wealth, he has nourishment. The villain is like, neatly put away forever. And yet he still has no child.
And no dog.
Well, and no dog. But I was expecting, when you read this to me the first time, I was like, oh, so the dog, I mean, this happens in the Firebird myth from Slavic, sort of Russian sort of tradition, a bunch of traditions. This happens in the Grimm's tradition as well, where there's a fox, there's a dog, there's a helpful sort of animal that then at the end of getting you through all these trials asks you to kill it. And you're like, dude, I can't, you've helped me. And it's like, no, you've trusted me this far. You need to trust me as well. So in tears, sort of heaving, the hero like does the bidding of the fox or the wolf and actually kills it. And then, by the end of the story, the wolf has come back to life in the form of like the brother, right? Or the son or whatever. Right. And it's like, oh, it was a spell. I couldn't tell you. You just needed to trust me. By the way, a basic rule of fairy tale and dream is that if there is a helpful animal who is accompanying you on your journey, you can basically carte blanche trust it.
Right. Right.
So if you're dreaming of a dog and the dog says, I want you to like sort of, quit this job and take this other job, the general rule of thumb is like, if it's this friendly animal that's been helpful, you can just like trust it without it. It never comes out. Another way of saying that is like the body never lies. Instinct, feeling, emotion never lies. Right. It can be misinterpreted by the intellect. Thinking always lies. Right. Because it uses symbolic systems. A symbol is, as Umberto Eco once said, right? A symbol is a sign is anything that can be used to lie. Yeah. Right. Because if I say, what do I say here? If I hold this, and then I have a sign that says pen.
Mm-hmm.
I can't lie. This is either it or it isn't it. But pen, I could say, buy my pen, and what you get in the mail is actually this, like, tissue paper. Right. So a sign is anything that can be used to indicate and lie. Thinking is to see the world typically not as it actually is, but as it is described. And then in the Tao Te Chings, or nature of reality, naming is the thing that, like, divorces you from actual reality. So anyway, feeling never lies, the body never lies, because it can't, it doesn't use sign. Thinking always ends up lying because it uses sign.
Yeah.
And yet I'm saying this, so maybe I'm lying too. Right? You never know.
Yeah.
And so the issue here is that in the end, right, he is still childless. So even despite all this rigmarole, right, there's still no generativity, no next version, no procreation, no continuation. The king is still castrated. The crops of the land are still sort of not, sort of generative. And so, and my point here is, I'm not driving to an alternate allegorical outcome to say, well, what the old man really should have done is this, and then he would have had a child.
Yeah.
Here, the dog is killed. And I was expecting, because I'm looking at it through the Northern European lens, I'm like, okay, when is the little boy going to come out of, like, the mochi rice cake thing, right?
Wow.
Like Krishna, right? Sort of like Butter Thief. And it never happened. It never happened. And I was like, what's wrong with the story? I'm not like, what is wrong here? I'm like, what is wrong with this story? What's going on here? It's defective.
Yeah.
And then I started saying, the symbol question, which is, that's interesting. He gets all this, the bad guy gets put in jail, but he still doesn't solve the original problem set right in the first line of the story, which is the great sorrow of their life was that they have no child, symbolically. And then you start to look at everything differently. You're like, okay, he's getting gold, he's getting ash, he's getting all this stuff. But at each point, what is going on here? And the only thing that, so I'll just tell you up front, I don't know the answer, right? That's the whole point of symbol versus allegory. In symbol, I sit in the fact where I just don't know.
Right.
And it's in that emptiness that all of this sort of generativity comes out of, like, it could be this, it could be that. Who knows, right? So I'm going to give you a spoiler alert where I'm not going to give you the answer at the end because I don't know the answer. But there are some interesting things that come up. So the main thing that came up for me is that he's got insight, he's got emotional nourishment, he's got ashes, the sort of wages of grief. The gold is great, it's good money, it's not false gold. The food does feed them, they are eating and nobody got sick.
Yeah.
And the ashes, they're good ashes. When he throws them on trees, they blossom, right? It leads to sort of the generativity of this. It's not that they fruit, it's that they blossom. And a blossom, a flower in a dream is typically sort of a symbol of a mandala, of a fully integrated inner masculine and inner feminine. Because the flower has male and female reproductive organs. It can self-pollinate, right? So it's complete in itself. That's not the only way an integrated inner masculine and feminine shows up in a dream, but it is one of the ways that it does come. And so the only weird thing then that I picked up on was in his engagement and relationship with the villain. This villain is in the village, right there with him. He's not a marauding brigand or a pirate or a bandit from outside the village, right? Coming in and burning his home. He's his neighbor, which symbolically makes him a kind of alter ego to him.
Yes.
Right? When the two brothers go out in a story, when it's two dogs, two cats, whatever, they are like basically saying left and right, they are the same, but let's look at the two different sort of conditions and parallel paths to make commentary on the choices you make, right? And so the villain, again, is a symbol of a part of you too. This is the part that is selfish, that's bitter, that's envious, right? All the sort of 7 deadly sins. And when he does the same thing, he doesn't just get nothing, he gets smelly stuff.
Yeah.
And the smelly stuff, that this bad smell comes up twice, because when he pounds the mochi, it's not just nothing. When you read the story, it's like smelly stuff comes out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's refuse and this horrible smell. And smell is basically a symbol of instinct, right? Your nose is a symbol of instinct. Like I smell a rat, like something doesn't smell right here. Where it's like you can't put a name on it, you can't intellectualize it. It's like a gut feeling, a hunch. But it's even stronger than that, because if it actually doesn't smell right, it is this like right on the boundary, right on the joint of the seen and unseen, the visible and invisible, the concrete and the ethereal. Smell is like right in between, right? It is of the air. It is hard to name. It's like, you know, something's off, right? When you smell salmon, it's like I could test it, you know, microbiologically and know that it's safe to eat, but it just doesn't smell quite right, so I'm not going to use it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's this instinct, and this malodorous sort of sense, hunch, instinct that it is reified, it is concretized, right? Because it's smell. It smells a physical thing. Is the thing that this alternate part of you generates. And the feeling I had, the smell I had of this interaction between the two men is that there is no deeper engagement between him and the villainous neighbor.
Yeah.
The villainous neighbor is throwing stuff at his dog and he doesn't say anything. He doesn't make friends with his neighbor, even though he lives close enough that he's always there, right? Another giveaway that this is your alter ego is that wherever you are digging up gold, he's like always there. He's always somehow able to peek through the bushes and see you because he is you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And there's no battle. There's no boundary.
Yeah.
You know, he shows up, says, "Give me your dog." And it's like, I couldn't even claim, you know, innocence. I know you throw rocks at my dog.
Yeah.
And yet I give you my dog.
Yeah.
Right. You give over the power of masculine manifestation, boundary control.
Yeah.
With no boundary. There's no boundary there. Right. The mochi rice pounder. Right. He just hands it over without question.
Yeah.
Now, after the fact, he's crying tears of bitterness. He doesn't punch him in the face. He doesn't call the Duke to like arrest him.
Yeah.
He doesn't get him back.
Yeah.
The closest thing he comes to engagement is to say, well, if you had wanted food, you could have just asked me.
Yeah.
Right. But when I show up at your door asking for the mochi pounder, like, why else would I be asking for it? Right. Did I presume you were going to use it to like dig up another tree?
Yeah.
It's like, what do you use a mochi pounder for? To make rice cakes. So it's like, it was implied. Yeah. I mean, basically, it's like all of this stuff is like obvious in hindsight, but there's something off that doesn't quite smell right. Right. With the good old man.
Yeah.
In how he's just, I mean, almost like, I mean, this is a story about the masculine, right? There's two guys, the wives are kind of off stage, right? There's the Duke and then this dog.
Yeah.
So this is like a parable, an allegory or symbol about the dynamics of the inner masculine.
Yeah.
And there's like no sort of engagement here. There's no boundary. And then finally, the false, you know, this is like this villain is like the false landlord of the Devil's Study Brother. He tries to do the imposter thing, to take credit. He does get punished, and then he's imprisoned. Yeah. So justice is done by the Duke, you know, the chair umpire, who steps in and says, "Okay, that's a line foul, and you're out of the game."
Yeah.
But now with this guy out of the game, there is no more engagement. And so there's some kind of feeling of failure here to confront the villain. There's no, so it's almost like there's a transformation of one aspect of the inner masculine, which is manifestation. Right? The dog can manifest till the cows come home. The dog is a power. So manifestation is no problem. But manifestation is still incomplete until you have the boundary control aspect as well. Right. So for me, it's like inner masculine. It's like there's two major functions: boundary control and manifestation. And here, to me, it's an example of like manifestation is cranking. Boundary control is like a big 0.
Yeah.
So it's like this like limping inner masculine.
Right.
Right. And here it is limping because, you know, you have the Duke, you have the good guy, and then the villain is in prison. So it's like it's a stool, it's a 3-legged stool with only 2 legs.
Yeah.
It falls over. And then in the story, it's like, oh yeah, the villain's put away forever. It's like a life sentence. And to me, that's just a disaster. It's like, when are we going to get our third leg back? So the thing can actually stand. And so that's why for me, so I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is, right? And I don't know if the author of the story meant to sort of hide this message in. I mean, these stories, when they come out of an artist, they're like dreams, right?
Yeah.
An artist can say, well, I designed it. I mean, any story that is too engineered and designed by thought is a terrible story. Nobody wants to read it. When something just comes out of you from inspiration, just barf it out. And you know, with Mozart, many of his like, you know, sort of pieces just came out complete. He was just like transcribing what was going through his head. Yeah. So they count as dreams because you didn't overthink and engineer them. So a story like this is basically like a dream to me.
Yeah. And
so when I pull back and I'm like, so there's the huge thing that we started with is completely unresolved, completely unresolved. And this is a zoom in on like the physics of inner masculine and the resolution of this issue. And the issue at the end of the story is unresolved. So something must be missing. I'm looking for the missing piece of the puzzle. And with inner masculine, the big missing piece of the puzzle is boundary control.
Yeah.
Is boundary control. Right. And there's feminine, right? So feminine nurturing and nourishment. There's tons of gold. There's tons of mochi cakes. There's tons of glory and honor from the Duke. So that's not a problem. And then overall vision, there's this almost missing piece of vision where it's like, if I had one great sorrow, I had this magic dog that just dug up and gave me this like pile of gold doubloons, right? If you had this added thing of like vision and more like you have the vision because you want to resolve this great sorrow. You don't have a child, right?
Yeah.
But the additional sort of failure to engage, which comes in sort of, you know, that next level of manifestation, which is not just manifesting random stuff that you happen to like, but like intentionally saying, this is the thing I want, right? I would like to have everything, but if I could only have one thing, this would be the one thing. And obviously here it's the child. Yeah. And just as he's not engaging the villain, he's not engaging the dog in the sense of like, if I have this magic dog and I can like ask it anything, I would ask it for a child. And maybe the dog, like Pinocchio, would just turn into a human child and say, thank you for asking the healing question. Here I am. You know, do you have any mochi cakes around? I'm hungry.
I'm reminded of the point about this that you brought out, where you even, you know, picked it out in the daimyo himself and even the Duke, where you said, if he has this old man who can perform a miracle and, you know, make withered trees bloom, why would he limit it just to one cherry tree in his garden?
And just for his amusement, he's like, oh yeah, do me another fun magic trick so we can all like, you know, clap.
Yeah. So it kind of, you pointed out there was this larger vision missing about what he wanted to do with this magic.
Right.
And I think that can be said about the old man as well, because at the end he has like an urn of ash, and he has all the gold and everything, but now he has that magical power. But what is he going to do with it other than making his trees in the garden bloom out of season, right? Apart from that thing, what's the bigger vision here? So yeah.
Right. And so my feeling here is not to say, oh, it's not just the villain that's bad. This guy is like, it's not to wag the finger, right?
Yeah.
It's to say, what is the matter here? And I just observe that the couple is still childless. And I'm like, is that okay? And the feeling I get from the old guy is that, yeah, he's still okay with it. Because he's kind of just accepted his great sorrow.
Yeah.
And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's this acceptance. It's not this failure of boundaries and failure to engage. Because I'm not an old man stage of life. I'm kind of in sort of midlife right now. So maybe I'm still like, let's keep going. Let's get the brass ring of whatever it is you want. And he is an old man. So he's like, no, it's fine. This is a sorrow that I've like processed. And now I have my box of ashes and all the rest of it. So maybe it's me that's out of line and being too ambitious, right? Not appropriate to his phase. But he's not exactly in the black phase, right? His dog is white.
Yeah.
Right? Everything in the story is white. So it's like, I guess what I'm saying is, I still don't know.
Right.
I still don't know. And it's appropriate that I don't know, because I'm open to further sort of input and guidance.
Yeah.
And so the hardest thing to do with a dream is, first of all, to remember it and write it down. But other than that is to try to read it not as an allegory, but as a symbol. And then to keep that symbol with you. A dream that is unresolved like this, but where it's stirring your pot as it's stirring our pot right now. It's like, so what is it about boundary control? Do I have an issue in boundary control? Should I think about it? How do I think about it? And when we do healing, we have all these other tools and exercises to sort of, dig into it even more. But I don't know if you have this feeling, everyone watching, it is like this story now. Before was like this red light, green light, stoplight of like Allegory. And now it has turned into this like chalice, right? This cold cauldron, this bubbling cauldron of like a magical potion where we're stirring it. Good smells and bad smells are coming out of it. But we know it's like, if you take a teaspoon of this, it will be transformative. Like it is changing you. It's changing how we think, and it's not done. Right? So the truly hardest part of a dream like this is to actually keep it with you throughout the day. And consult it and look at it, because it takes a lot of energy, like muscles that we typically don't use, to continue looking at a dream like this from different angles. It's not about switching blame from the villain to the old guy, right? And it's not just like, because you could also go even further allegorical to say, oh, my one great sorrow is still unresolved because of that darn villain, or bad luck, or my parents were shitty and I was cheated out of my rightful stuff, right? What we do know from the story is that kind of bitterness and ingratitude is the path of the villain.
Right.
Right. And that's fine, right? We want to change how we engage with it, but we also don't want to just fully 100% go in that direction.
Yeah.
It's not so much that we should be bitter. We can choose that path if we want. But in that, how we almost like engage with that bitter side of ourselves, where we don't push it down. We say, what's going on here? What's the matter here? And just kind of let it take on a life of its own from there.
Yeah, I think that the interestingness of the villain in the story is also the role that he plays of the imposter. Right. He wants to do exactly the same thing as the old guy and have exactly the same results for himself. And it's kind of the clenching of, I want to do this the way he did it, and I want to get the same results. Not just like you said, you could just ask me to share, my wealth, and then we will see. If I refuse, then maybe the story will take another direction. But so he's shadowing the old man, but not entirely. So there is a very interesting dynamic of what the darker masculine is trying to do, and also failing to achieve. So, like you said, I found that really interesting that the old man doesn't explore that. It's like, why are you trying to follow me? Why are you trying to do this? Or
Right.
What are you trying to do? Kind of the whole thing. I mean, even the daimyo doesn't ask that question. Like, why did you lie?
Yeah.
Why are you trying to perform a miracle which you clearly can't?
Well, I mean, the daimyo is kind of, dopey as well, right? It's sort of like we said, like not sort of taking this and like passing it out to everyone in the kingdom, not asking like, how did you come about this? Can you help with the crops of the peasants as well, and not just my, fetishized favorite sort of single tree, and all of that. So, and it's interesting because for me as a healer, it is, I guess, this practice of like sitting around and saying, I don't know, that has led to all these other tools and exercises that we do in healing, like the day 3 board member interview, where you would interview the daimyo, you would interview the dog to find out, right, what is the issue? The old man, why are you not maintaining boundaries? The villain, right, why are you bitter, et cetera, et cetera. Because when you allow yourself to sit in a state of, I don't know, forces end up responding to you, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. So forces end up responding to you to say, well, here's maybe one way you would find out more, and that is just a very generative kind of action. Uncomfortable, not necessarily productive, but almost always very, very generative, very, very generative. And this generativity is exactly the reversal of this castration wound of the Fisher King and this childless, non-generativity, literally, of the old man. I mean, it's almost like you can almost say, if you are led to read this just as an allegory, then you will remain, quote unquote, childless as well. Because allegory cuts off generativity. Because it's black and white. Right?
Yeah.
It's black and white. Any other thoughts?
So one last thing that came to me was there is clearly, in this story, there's aspect of manifestation, like you said, ego, power, insight, and nourishment and everything. So that clearly comes from some kind of a transformation process or, grief resolving that the old man has done. So there is that power, but, this is how, when you raise those points, the thing that I thought is perhaps the next stage, at least for me, in the way that I took it, is to ask, what am I going to do with that power right now that I have nourishment and insight? What is the next milestone, and what is the next goal, and what is it that I want to do with this power? And also, there is again a contrast of honoring the memory and showing gratitude to the force, the life force that was the dog, in its various forms, but also to kind of show your appreciation and gratitude, but then not entirely engaging with it and saying, okay, now that I have this life force working for me, for my benefit, what can I ask it back? Or can I, have this exchange, a dialogue, rather than just waiting to see what happens? So
yeah, that totally resonates.
It felt for me like there is manifestation, which is wonderful and miraculous, but not harvested. Like even the cherry trees don't talk about the cherry fruit; they talk just about the blooms.
Right. It's almost like windfall.
Yeah.
right? But not exactly manifestation. So windfall without boundaries, right? Budget, right? With no proposal, with no work plan, no like budget with no proposal is just a mess, right? It's like, oh, we're going on all these trips and boondoggles, right? But we're not actually getting anything done and advancing the mission of the company, right? So here it is this feeling of the other thing that changes from the beginning of the story to the end is that of the four aspects of the masculine, the villain, the old man, the dog, and the duke, two are now suppressed and inactive. The dog is in absolute life-giving ash in a box.
Right.
In a box doing nothing.
Right.
And the villain, right, the one that stirred the pot, you could argue that the element of the villain was the thing that got the dog to the pestle, the mortar and pestle, and got the mortar and pestle to the ash.
Yeah. He was
this sort of villain, this trickster, sort of this motivator of envy and everything is the thing that kept the story moving.
Yeah.
And they are in the prison, and they can't move either. Right. So half of your inner masculine life force. And actually, it's funny because it's the half that does engage. The duke is the one that doesn't engage.
Yeah.
And the old man is the one that doesn't engage. The dog is the one that barks and drags you forward. And the villain is the one that gets the story moving forward.
Yeah.
And both of those aspects are now suppressed and basically mothballed. And, right, sort of this mutual arising kind of thing. At the same time, the couple has remained childless. Yeah. Because there has been no boundary of like, okay, if I can have all of these things, what I really want is procreation in a child.
Yeah.
Like you said, if I can have all of these things, then let me speak my actual desire, not my need, not my want. Because you notice it's the allegory side. It's like, okay, boys and girls, if you want money and honor, you'll be like the good guy too. But if you ask the good guy, does this satisfy you? The answer is no, because if we read at the beginning of the story, their life had already been a very happy and peaceful one, save for one great sorrow, and that sorrow is completely unresolved by the end of the story.
Yeah. So there is no emerging life force, and there is
no emerging life force
forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else?
Yeah, that's my. I mean, when you mentioned the 4 characters turning into 2 at the end, like 2 pushed out of the story and remaining 2, I was like, huh, that was the moment for me. Well, like, okay, so we've got work to do, not just to ask the question of desire and manifestation, but also, are all players on board and who are we missing? So that kind of just, put me off balance for a while. I was like, we think it's a great, neatly, tightly wrapped up story with all good things happening to the good guys, but at the end,
it is neatly, tightly wrapped up, too tightly.
Yeah, and then it's like, who are we leaving behind? So I think that's a great insight for me personally.
Right, we have 2 lost board members at the end of this. Right, we have 2 lost board members.
2 lost board members who are not part of the game anymore. Yeah.
And so you could say, in terms of the physics of healing that we know, but even in the story, if we were to do like part 2, right, the sequel to this story, it's like there is no child and there is no healing of sorrow until we bring back the ashes and the dog and the villain.
Yeah.
And we come to some kind of reconciliation.
Yeah.
Right, that's the ultimate. That's and then the entire kingdom of Japan like bursts forward and bloom.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's the kind of deep reconciliation. Because the villain is, Loki, right? The villain is the trickster.
Right.
Right. And we all know what happened when Odin and the rest of them locked Loki that story of Balder that I told, I forgot in which section in session of the series. Then they lock Loki down. I think it was the artist.
The artist
archetype.
one, talking about the trickster as an artist.
We talk about the trickster, right? So they lock the trickster down in not Tartarus, but whatever the underworld is, and that triggers the apocalypse, Ragnarok.
Right.
And so, basically a similar kind of thing here. Okay, so let me also then let me talk about the exercise that I would like to suggest.
Yeah. Thanks,
Okay.
Artie.
Well, okay. And so the exercise here is pretty straightforward for this week, between now and the next week, is to basically ask, spend a little bit of time reflecting. If this story has resonated with you and you want to sort of take different parts of it and run that forward, we'll keep this dream with you as well. Because this is a story now that has, let me say this, just as in last week, we talked about the nature of stories and how they inject themselves into our lives and roll forward and insist on showing up. This is a story that has injected itself into, my sort of working dialogue with Gary. And then now it has injected itself into live sacred space and into this consciousness of all of you. So this story then, if you wish, can count as a dream for you as well. Right? So if you had this story come to you as a dream last night, or had the story come to you through LSS, Live Sacred Space, to you this Sunday morning, to me, when I read these things, it counts completely validly either way. It's equal weighting. So you can take this dream and keep it with you all week. And then in addition, the sort of fun exercise, just sort of coming out of this and thinking about symbol and allegory in general, is to spend some time, only if you want, right? No pressure to participate, right? To think about what stories have come to you recently. And you can count this story among them as well. When did those stories come up? Right? What was happening in your life that week, that day, when a story came up? What was the story? What is the significance of the story to you? Or dream? It can be a story, it can be a dream, it can be something that happened in real life, right? Where you're like, whoa, that was like out of a movie or something. And the question then is, the exercise is, what was the allegorical reading of the incident or story? And what was the symbolic reading of the incident or story? And you read it like a dream. Even in the past, right? When have stories hit you remarkably at different times in your life, as children, as adults? And when have they made a difference in your life, these stories that have come to you? And again, it can be stories, actual happenings, dreams, or things that you read or watch, right, in media. And then another question then related to that is, so given all that, what is or what has been the role of story in this sense of it in your life? And what role would you potentially like for story to have in your life going forward, right? Perhaps differently, with some of these new ideas that we're kind of introducing here as well. So anyway, that's the exercise to try. Again, only if you want, no pressure. And we'll kind of, and if you have thoughts, input, additional stories you'd like to share, feel free to email me or leave questions on the Crowdcast or the comments, and we'll kind of take it from there and try to get to everything. Okay, so that's the exercise. And then the last thing I wanted to do here before we close the session was, this is maybe a little bit overload of story for one session, but I meant to sort of share this story last week. I totally forgot, and I wanted to share it now before we sort of lost track of it. And this is kind of relevant to our discussion of symbol versus allegory as well. And also kind of relevant to last week's topic where like stories will inject themselves into your lives. So this is a note that I got from an advisee who is in live group advising and is here in live sacred space. And this is a message that she left. And basically, I'm just going to read this. I've edited a little bit for sequence and everything. And she says, hi, Artie, I remember you were talking in a sacred space session a number of Sundays ago about the Black man being the buried board member of our society. And that when we could see a group of young Black men walking down the street and think to ourselves, everything's going to be all right with these young men in it, right? And you claim them as yours in your heart, regardless of whether you actually talk to them or not. That was the sort of, not even exercise, but that was sort of the example that just came to me in that session on American racism. We would know the healing had begun. Actually, that's very generous of you. I was like, at that point, we're basically done. I'm like, at that point, we're basically done. And she goes on to say, I had just such an experience yesterday and wanted to share it here and also offer an update on my personal journey. I won't share her name, but she said in other emails, you know, I live in Richmond, Virginia. I am a 71-year-old young white woman with white hair and the enthusiasm of a teenager or something like that, LOL. And she says, by the way, FYI, Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy. This is the southern sort of states in the American Civil War who were fighting to preserve the institution of slavery in the 1800s. So Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy, and all the protesting that has been going on, this is where she lives, here over the Confederate monuments on Monument Avenue, have been very active with all the racial conflict going on in our country. And so for the incident, she says, I live in an old historic building that houses a business and 4 apartments. Behind our building is a parking lot that is reserved for tenants, along with a sign stating just that. Since COVID started, there have only been a few cars in the parking lot on any given day, and even fewer in the evening. Occasionally, people who aren't supposed to park there do, but most of the time, I recognize the cars that are parked in the lot. Early last evening, she's writing about 2 weeks ago, I walked from the side of my building into the back parking lot with 2 heavy garbage bags in my hands. I noticed an unfamiliar car had just pulled into the lot and 4 young Black men got out of the car as I was walking to the trash. They immediately came up to me and asked if they could help. Such a good story. I could feel their kindness and not only handed them the bags, but asked if they would be willing to help me get the trash cans into the alley because trash pickup was the next morning. And I knew the containers would be heavy. I mean, just good sort of elder wise woman. It's like, if you're here to help, then let's put you to work properly. She goes on to say, I had actually been concerned about whether I would be strong enough to push them into the alley, the big trash containers. They were happy to help and did so with enthusiasm, and I was so appreciative. I thanked them and they walked off. I got in my car to go to the grocery store, and as I got out and drove up the street, I saw them again on the sidewalk. I honked my horn, gave them a thank you wave and a thumbs up, and all 4 of them responded in kind. As I was driving past them, I thought to myself, you know, the world is going to be okay with those 4 young, wonderful men in it. And then, at that moment, I was reminded of what you had said in Sacred Space. With all the protests and tensions that have been going on for such a long time, I was so grateful to have had this encounter that unfolded the way that it did. And to top it all off, as I pulled back into my parking lot as I returned from the store, these young men had just gotten back into their car and were backing out, so we got a chance to wave at each other one more time. In my healing work with you, I've recovered some deeply buried board members after much inner work. And she goes on to, well, she says, I'm surprising myself every day with setting healthy boundaries, and Inner Masculine is doing a superb job. It gets easier and easier to honor my boundaries, and I'm not people-pleasing for the first time in my life. Good job. The change is nothing short of amazing, and I think my outer world is starting to reflect the changes that are going on in my inner world. I would say, yeah. It's fantastic, as reflected in the story I opened with. You have given me the tools to help myself, and it's finally happening. I feel whole, and I will be forever grateful. Thank you. I thank you too. I will be forever grateful to you as well. And so I just wanted to share this as an amazing item and update. It's just extraordinary. And you know, I'm a guy from New York, right? And you sort of tell that story to me. I don't, you know, a sort of 71-year-old sort of, you know, wise woman, crone woman carrying her own garbage bags out early evening, and a car that's not supposed to be there, and 4 guys come out. I don't care what race. I don't care if it's a police car and 4 police officers come out. I'm like immediately tensed and like ready for action, right? So, and so the story here, as she told it and I read it, it was just like a punch in the face. I mean, in a good way, in terms of just, you know, the incredible flood of just emotion for me of, you know, not just that these wonderful, you know, lovely young men, you know, just out of pure reflex, like just helped her with her thing and they went off to their thing, but just the amazing way that, you know, because for her inner masculine is getting stronger and stronger. It just happens to be a part of her healing process. And we know that inner masculine is, you know, one of its functions is manifestation and boundary control. And so, you know, can we say this was a kind of manifestation event? Because the archetype of this happening is within her, right? Because we talked about it like several months back in May. And here it is, I mean, I don't know what you call it other than manifestation, right? The outer world, we always say in day 7 of the 7-day healing program, the outer world reflects the inner world. Right? The outer world reflects the inner world. Dreams reflect different things going on inside of you. And when you open your eyes, like life is but a dream, right? The outer world around you will tend to be a reflection of things going on inside you. And here in the middle of Richmond, Virginia, capital of the American Confederate States, during the Civil War, it's not just some interaction between a white woman and young black men, but this specific thing where, you know, they have an interaction and she just thinks reflexively, oh, you know, I mean, as long as the American Republic is still, you know, producing young men like this, I think we're going to be all right. Right. And this is the sort of elder wise woman, crone, daughter of the Republic herself, right, thinking this to herself. And then only after the fact, she's like, oh, wait a minute. The thought I just thought, that seems familiar. And then she realizes that's something that we had said earlier as well. So the thing is, like, how do you read the story? How do you read the story? Now, first of all, you could read it as an allegory. And it says, it just goes to show race relations are not all that bad, right? Or you could read it as an allegory to say, hey, Artie's healing stuff actually really works. Maybe I'll go buy me some, right? The allegory. Or, you know, you want to be cool like her, right? You don't want to be like some other woman that would have like called the police or called the tow company to like tow the car away. You want to be cool like her. You don't want to be like the villain. You want to be the good guy. You could read it like that and you would not be wrong. You would not be wrong. Whereas the symbolic reading for me, and you can have your own symbolic reading, but this is my own wild ass intuition, would be that here is a woman in deep healing and courage in that journey of healing, right? And the outer world is changing in manifestation under the hand and purview and presiding of her own unleashed inner masculine. Right, her own inner masculine is protecting boundaries, but not just protecting boundaries, but like manifesting outer, young, emerging inner masculines to come to her assistance as well. Right, The outer world is changing to reflect her healed inner reality. And the natural question is, the Fisher King question, what is going on here? Right? What is the state of affairs here? What is happening here? And even some of the specifics. These guys are not helping her move furniture. We're just getting into the dream reading mythopoetics of this real life event. They're not helping her move furniture. They're not helping her cook a meal, right? Nourishment and sort of, other further manifestation. They're literally helping her take out the trash, right? Which is a very powerful symbol for me, right? Purging, purification, clearing of energies, right? That's what these young inner masculines are coming out. And they are showing up in force. It's not one random guy, it's 4 of them, right? The self is a quaternity. And here the symbol is the full power of all 4 slots for this incident is being taken over by the inner masculine. And let's just talk about abundance, okay? She doesn't need 4 young, right, sort of helpful, enthusiastic guys helping her with her 2 bags, which she can carry on her own, right? But 4 show up anyway. 4 show up anyway. And they're young, right? This is the emerging inner masculine, the 2.0 next generation version of inner masculine for our society, but also as a reflection of the emerging inner masculine within herself, right? The old man in the Japanese folktale was childless still at the end of that episode. Not here, right? Not here. Her own emerging inner masculine, like bounding out of the car, running toward her to ask if they can help. Inner masculine is on it, being reflected in these young men. And, other things, right? She is very open to them, right? She's not scared of them. She's not like whatever. And they are mobile and moving forward in life because they're driving a car. A car is a symbol of like the vehicle of your life path forward. They're moving forward in life. Other aspects, and I'll just go through these quickly, just from my notes. This instantiation of the inner masculine is also claiming space. They are parking where they are not supposed to park, and they're not getting pushed back. They're not getting punished. No one called the police. No one called a tow truck company to come tow the car. Right now, maybe a nosy neighbor from above, which would be a symbol of a part of you too, like a villain, right? And then there is this feeling of, these little details really come to the fore when you start reading it, not as allegory. It's like, so what is the headline, right? What do we do next? It's more like, just like, huh, right? And you notice these little things like the waving back and forth, not just at the end of the sort of assistance, but as she drove out, she saw them again. And when she came back, she saw them again too. Right? So there is this feeling of abundance, not just of power, of help, of goodwill, of enthusiasm, but also this feeling of mutual blessing in abundance. Right? When a woman you help in that way, literally like blesses you, waves, gives you the thumbs up, that is her blessing upon them. And they bless her right back, right? Multiple echoing, reverberating blessings back and forth. Even now, it's so extraordinary. She shared it in live group advising. Now I'm sharing it in live sacred space. There will be even more reverberating of these blessings back and forth. All started by those 4 guys, those 4 like amazing guys, right? And so anyway, with this non-allegorical symbolic reading, it's not all right, so then you better do this, and you better be more like her, and you better be more like these guys, right? But more just there it is, this thing happened, so lovely, and oh, look at this connection, oh, look at that connection, how interesting. In other words, like wonder and curiosity, not asking and interrogating, right? It's more of instead of like, okay, so what does this mean? What does this mean? What is the state of American racism? What is the state of our democracy? You could read it like that, but instead of reading it like that, when you switch from allegory to symbol, instead of saying, what does this mean? You're just like, whoa. You're just like, whoa. Right. And so that to me is just another example of the subtle distinction between symbol and allegory, and how you can use these two lenses to read things in your life, stories, folk tales, dreams, but also, sort of real life events, right? Real life events that happen to you in the real world, because, life is but a dream, and you can read everything in the outer world around you in that same sort of symbolic, mythopoetic manner. So anyway, I just wanted to share that last story with you and say thank you so much for sharing it with us as well. Your sharing it with us is a blessing on us as well, and I feel your blessing. I thank you for your blessing, and I bless you right back. So thank you. All right, so that's it. That's all I had. So I want to thank Gauri for helping us with the story. And so now with that, it's 11:46. I should go ahead and close the session. So the next session is Sunday. It's free, open to everyone. Please invite others. If you have questions, ask them in the comments or post them in the question area, and we'll do a Q&A session in the next few weeks here. If you want to join the next session now, there's a green call to action button in the Crowdcast. There should be a link in the Facebook live post where you can sign up for the next session. And with that, I'll go ahead and close the session. I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with me and with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you.